what we want to do today is to give you an introduction to a new program that we will be starting with in cooperation with the National Pork Board, and that is to try to get information on health and safety of producers and workers in pork production out across the country. And that's why we're set up with this facility over here, which is a webcasting type of a program which will broadcast what we're saying here over to one person who's in Tennessee, who you will hear from later. Dan Dembry is his name, and then one of our other colleagues in Iowa City, Murray Madsen. And so that's a bit of a demonstration as to how this is going to work. What we envision is that we will work with a number of producers and organizations so that this kind of information can be brought into many different facilities across the country. All you need really is to have access to the web, and so that's really our introduction to this program. So Risto Rautiainen will take over the last part. He's kind of our technician. Aaron Klein, I want to introduce him. Aaron is our project manager on this and helps us with all the details to put into shape. So, how many of you here have ever known of somebody in production agriculture who has had an injury or an illness that has caused them some time away from work? Probably most of them. And one of the things that, how's a veterinarian get into this business anyway? And it happens because of my experience in production agriculture. My great-grandfather was killed in a farm accident. My grandfather was disabled in 2 occasions, once by a tractor rollover, and the second, he lived through that, and the second was he was attacked by a boar that took the major portion of his gluteus maximus away and left him with a permanent disability. And my father had a permanent disability from me actually running over him with a manure spreader, and I'm up here hard of hearing and a hip replacement, a bad shoulder from an injury being bucked off a horse driving cattle. So we've all had those kinds of experiences, and that's been my interest in trying to keep people alive and well in production agriculture. The University of Iowa has been involved in what we call agricultural health and safety or agricultural medicine since 1955, a long time. And we have these 2 centers that are exhibited up here, Iowa's Center for Ag Health and Safety, as well as the Great Plains Center, which focuses on research and then how do we get that information out to you folks and get that research into practice to make these lessen the experiences of injuries and illnesses that occur. So what do we hope to have accomplished today? Well, one of the things is to sort of bring into focus why it is that we should be concerned about occupational health. And that's what I want to review a little bit as to what are some of the reasons why we should be concerned about that. I want to talk very briefly about 5, I'm not saying that they're major ones, but they're ones that we really pay attention to in terms of some specific kinds of occupational health and injury concerns. What are some preventive measures? Then I want to focus on a specific prevention program we call Certified Safe Farm. And then what is the Pork Industry Safety Training Seminars online course? And that's where all of this is sort of focusing into to provide an introduction to that. And then to bring into effect, how does this distance technology going to work to help that? So that's hopefully kind of the objectives that we're going today. So what are some of the reasons we should all be concerned and aware of this? Not only because, we get hurt, our kids get hurt, our workers get hurt, we do ourselves. There's a human concern there, but also it's very expensive. And our health care costs today are a major problem in production agriculture. When an average insurance costs, health insurance costs for a family of 4 now is over $11,000. And that has gone up tremendously, 87% increase since 2000. And over 70% of farm families say this is a very significant problem of our health insurance. And so that's one reason, is to try to drive those health insurance costs down through practicing health and safety techniques. So there's some reason to lessen those because of the bottom line. In terms of the human capital, people that work for us in these operations, many of the operations now are providing some of that health insurance. And again, it's very costly. And there is a program now that in this state that if you can show with your small group of employees that you can reduce the injury and illness experience in that group, you're going to get a new rate break on your insurance. So that's another reason why we should be interested. Workers' comp costs, another very expensive concern. And again, many of those companies, if you can show them that you have reduced risk, you will get a break. And disability costs for the same thing, for disability insurance. And OSHA concerns. Where you have more than 10 employees, as many of you know, it does come under the rubric then of having to meet OSHA regulations and guidelines. What we would like to see is that many of these operations develop their own safety and health program so that it's what we call a STAR program, or which then allows you to be able to monitor and have your own health and safety program so that you don't have OSHA walking in unannounced, basically. But it has to be a good program. So we're trying to move the industry in that direction. And liability risks. And these are obviously some things that are concerned. If a worker does get sick or injured on the job, there may be liability concerns. And, of course, reducing sick leave. All of these things are important for the bottom line. All of these things are important for employee retention, for worker morale, and, again, for the financial bottom line. So those are, there's a human concern here, and there's economic concerns. There's, we have a lot of things that are important in helping to make an operation productive and financially successful. And one of the things that we oftentimes forget about is what can we do in terms of this health and safety and to help make that production system a profitable system. Here are 5 areas of concern that seem to be propping up to us more commonly all the time that we are aware of. Injuries, for sure, and animal-related injuries. I mentioned, my grandfather, for example, and many of us probably have experienced that. This is part of the training program that we will make available, hopefully through this webcasting system, to assure that new employees come on board, have proper training in animal handling and trying to reduce the injuries from animal-related injuries. Needle sticks is another one. In this past week, I've probably got a half a dozen calls from physicians, healthcare practitioners, producers who have gotten on the wrong end of a needle and have ended up in a hospital. And how many of you have heard of that situation or have stuck yourself at one time or another? And what happens depends on what you get stuck with and so on and so forth. And one of the problems is a lot of our healthcare providers don't really know and understand production agriculture, and particularly what it is that you are working with, because what you're working with is going to depend on what the health problem is going to be related. We have a lot of women also working now in facilities, as you know, and we're also maybe handling oxytocin, we may be handling alpha prostaglandins, and if a woman is pregnant, an accidental inoculation with one of those products may end up in an abortion. So those are things that we have to be concerned about. Noise issues are a problem, and we have been working with monitoring noise exposure in a lot of facilities, and noise exposure is oftentimes in the range where the regulations would say you need to do something about reducing that noise exposure. So we're talking about 85 decibels and up. So we're talking the kind of noise that you would experience all day long sitting in an uncabbed tractor seat without a muffler on it, and that kind of a cumulative process. So that's another area that we're concerned about, trying to figure out ways to reduce that noise exposure, and also that is also to keep away from having to wear earmuffs all the time. And we always like to try to remove the hazard first before we start putting things on people. Manure gases, this fortunately is less of an acute problem than it has been in the past. Over the past 20 years or so, I've investigated 20-some different incidents where there was a human fatality. Fortunately, we have fewer of those. All of you probably know of instances where there's been pigs that have died in buildings because of hydrogen sulfide gas, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But it is a recurring kind of issue that we haven't solved all the problems. And then respiratory exposures. And this is something that lingers on for sort of chronic situations that we need to pay attention to. So let me just briefly talk a little bit about manure gases to kind of review a little bit of, most of you know about this, but I want to just review some of those things. And if you've got questions or comments as we go along, please bring them up. The acute problem is hydrogen sulfide, which comes about when the manure breaks down in an anaerobic situation, typically in deep pits. And methane could be a problem on some occasions. Sometimes we have maybe a fire in a building or that a pilot light might set off. We had an explosion over in our end of the state a while back that damaged a building pretty badly, but it's relatively rare. And hydrogen sulfide in terms of acute human health problems is what is really the issue that we're concerned about. The survey that we did some years ago, about 40% of the facilities that we visited and tested, if you agitated that pit, you could produce sufficient gases to become acutely toxic because of hydrogen sulfide in 40% of them. And even if you had the ventilation completely on. So this is something that we probably don't pay enough attention to. We just go in there and turn the agitator, stick the agitator down in there, whatever kind of an agitator it might be, and turn on without thinking. But think that 40% of those situations could produce an acute toxic situations under certain circumstances. And those circumstances are that it's got to be more of an anaerobic condition, means typically if you're talking about something deeper than 3 feet, and you have an increased risk if you have acid conditions in that pit, because that's when more of the gas stays in a form that will bubble out. And you know that agitation is what really creates the problem in terms of the gas coming out very rapidly. Does anybody know why that is? Why if you go into a building on a normal day, it could be a 6-foot deep pit or whatever, and you can measure relatively low levels of hydrogen sulfide, quite low levels. But if you agitate that, it can bump up very dramatically, very fast. And anybody know why that is? Got an idea? Think about a bottle of carbonated beverage, a Coke or a Pepsi. And you've got a lot of carbon dioxide in there. And if you take the top of it off very gingerly, without agitating it, eventually it'll go flat because that gas comes out very slowly. But if you shake it up, I could squirt you guys right in the front row with it, right? And the reason is because you're increasing the surface area when you shake it up between that liquid and the air phase, that it just allows that gas to come out very rapidly. And that's the same thing that happens when you're agitating. So agitation is the key. And then another thing is if you have high sulfate waters. We have a lot of waters, particularly if you have like 600 foot or so deep wells, you can have high sulfate content of that water. That is the food for bacteria to make hydrogen sulfide. So if you have waters that are higher than 250 parts per million, you could have an increased risk. So prevention, what we always say, or I always say, is that when you put that agitator, whatever kind of an agitator it is, whether you backflush the slurry wagon or whatever it is, don't do it very gingerly, and have the whatever you can, the curtains up or whatever, so you can watch those animals. Don't be in there, but so you can watch the animals. And if you see any restlessness or discomfort in those critters stop right away. And you may have to do it just very slowly while you're watching that happen. If it comes to a situation where you can't agitate it at all without causing some problem in those pigs, then you have to change the pH of that pit. You have to add lime to it. It's slaked lime. It's a kind of lime that you would use in construction for a mortar rather than field lime, and that'll bring the pH down to a point where you probably can empty it. Check the sulfates in the water, more frequent emptying. What happens in the winter this time, that deep pit, nothing's going on in there. Now all the bacteria are sleeping for the winter, but when it warms up, then you get sort of a bloom, and you really get high levels of hydrogen sulfide that can develop. So if you can empty before it really gets warm out, you have a lot better chance of not creating a situation. And empty more frequently. The more frequent that you can empty it, the better. Of course, that's going to depend on the situations, your production operation. Talk a little bit about respiratory concerns. The big problem from respiratory concerns for people, and to a certain extent people, or pigs as well, combines exposures to dust, which contains endotoxin. Anybody heard of endotoxin? We have a ringer in the back there. You've heard of endotoxin. Anyway, it is a component of gram-negative bacteria. A lot of those types of bacteria live in the gut of us and pigs and so on. And when that comes out, it gets on the floors and it gets recirculated into the air. It's got endotoxin. It's a very inflammatory and irritating substance that can cause long-term respiratory problems. And when you combine that with ammonia, that acts as sort of like a synergistic effect. Synergistic effect would be like if somebody hit me in the shoulder really hard. A synergistic effect would be if somebody hit me with a baseball bat. So those two work together in that way. And the way to reduce those respiratory exposures, you got to reduce both the ammonia and the dust and endotoxin together. We're mostly concerned about chronic situations because typically you don't see problems in most people until they've been in the buildings for like 6 years or so. And then you might start seeing some problems. There are a certain number of people who go into a building right away and for the first day or first week or so may start having problems. There are a few of those people. And it all depends on your mom and dad who gave you your genetics. Not all, but a lot of it depends on that. Because if you happen to have the right genetics, you can tolerate more of this endotoxin than other people. And some people are just more sensitive. And it's not an allergic situation. This is a thing I hear from physicians that call me up all the time saying, well, I've got producer X that's got to be allergic because having problems with these buildings. And by and large, they're not allergic. It's just this irritation situation from the endotoxin. And that's a good thing because if you cut down on the exposure, you can avoid the problem. If somebody is truly allergic, it's very difficult to manage that because it only takes a little bit of an exposure to cause a problem. Airways concerns does include one acute condition that we call organic dust toxic syndrome, which is an acute effect, sudden effect. When I say sudden, 4 hours or so after you've been exposed, and it makes you feel like you've got the flu. And for some people who have cleaned out a soybean bin or a grain bin when you're getting ready to fill it up in the evening, they get really sick. They have chest tightness and they may cough, got a headache, and they just feel lousy. And who's had that? And we've got a few people who've had that. So you can get the same thing, particularly if you stir up a lot of dust, like if you're moving or sorting hogs. That can happen. And it happens occasionally. And the other two things that happen are bronchitis, which is you cough and you spit, basically, because your airways are irritated. And there's a condition that we call asthmatic-like condition, but it's not an allergic-type condition for the most part. But it's after you've been in the building for, let's say, most of a day, and you're starting to wheeze a little bit like that. and a lot of people experience that oftentimes together with bronchitis. And it can be an annoyance, but if it goes on for a long time, then it can I'm talking about years, it can lead to a situation that might lead to some permanent situations. But it's a key with those symptoms that says, better do something about that. We need to take care of that. In terms of prevention in that regard, as I mentioned, that we've been doing kind of research, particularly in this whole area with swine production since 1974. That's a long time. It's a long time. The industry has really changed a lot, but some things haven't changed. And dust and gases and endotoxin and so on have not necessarily changed. But we know one of the most important things that you can do for dust control is a good person on the end of a power sprayer, a power washer. And routine power spraying and cleaning of a building is probably the best thing that you can do to control dust. You can't necessarily ventilate it out, and in fact, if ventilation, there's a certain point where ventilation will perhaps even increase the problem, because you increase so much air currents in the building that you keep more of the dust in suspension in the air. And gas control, I talked to you very briefly about hydrogen sulfide control. And let's talk a little bit about ammonia control. One of the most important things there is to, again, keep the floor clean, because 40% of the ammonia in the air in buildings typically comes from off the surface of the floor somewhere. So if you've got a floor that doesn't clean well, that picks up a lot of moisture, that has a lot of manure on it and collects urine and stays there, that's where a lot of your ammonia comes. So again, power washing and good flooring materials. The worst situation have been these old style concrete floors that are quite wide slats, and they get pitted, and they're really hard to keep clean, and they collect a lot of manure. Those are some of the worst ones that result in not only ammonia but also dust as well. And how clean is clean? Well, we've done a lot of research to find out how much dust you have to get out of the air. And in a typical building this time of the year, you will go in it, and it might be, let's say, 3 milligrams per cubic meter of air. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean much to you, but I can tell you that if it's 10 milligrams of dust per cubic meter of air, then it starts to look hazy in a building. Not steam, but it's just because there's so much air so much dust in the air, it starts to look hazy. That gives you some idea of how much dust. We like to see buildings that are less than 3 milligrams of dust, like 2.5 milligrams. And typically most all buildings are below that in the summertime. I don't know that I've seen one for years that is higher than that in the summer. So it's in the winter we need to pay attention to that. And mainly it's management. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do these things. There are some engineering solutions that have been out there. We have worked with a system, an oil sprinkling system, which you can hook up to both the water as well as to an oiling system. You can use soybean oil meal, for example, and it just doesn't take very much. You can get that out, and it falls on the surfaces, and basically what it does is keep the dust from recirculating, and it'll cut the dust down significantly, 50% at least. And then you can also use that same system to pre-soak the building before you power wash it. So there's some engineering solutions to that, and that's probably one of the better ones, and it's not that expensive. But we're coming down here now to education. And this is sort of one of the fundamental points that we're leading into now, is to try to get this kind of information out more generally amongst the producer population to try to hopefully get that functioning. And this sort of research to practice is what we call. One of the programs that we started almost 10 years ago now tries to put together engineering-type solutions, management-type solutions, health care solutions, and education into a package, and make it such that you have to get a certain score to become, quote, a certified safe farm. So you have goals to try to achieve. So we've had a number of farms on this close to, I think, close to about 600 farms now. And it involves all of those different modes, which would be an on-farm safety audit, health and safety audit to go through an operation and to identify things that could be fixed to reduce exposures. It has a wellness component to it, so that you would be checked by a nurse or another healthcare professional to see if there's any kind of exposure problem that might be causing a health problems that would say, okay, here's some things we need to do to try to correct that. And then also education, to combine that with all of this to try to encompass those interventions to make sure that people understand them and to put them into play, and then incentives. And the incentives comes from the standpoint is what we hope will happen in the future is that people who are a certified safe farm will get a break on their insurance, be it health insurance, be it workman's comp, disability, and that maybe other vendors, maybe other suppliers would like to provide and enhance producers who are certified safe farms to give a break on whether it's a loan from the bank or whether it's a loan from the green machines or whoever, or a break on costs from the green machine people or whatever, because it's good business to reward those kinds of operations that are that are healthful and safe and are going to be around. And are going to be around and more likely than be able to pay back whatever loans and use more of their products. So that's the kind of program that we're aiming at, and hope then that will fold into trying to put together a package that does make a difference in the long run. Now, we worked with an organization called AgriSafe, which actually we started 1987. And these are actually clinics scattered around the state that provide occupational health and safety services in their local community. And these are the folks that really operate this certified safe farm out in our communities. And also, for those of you who ever have questions, whether you need a question of what kind of respirator you should use, or you've got this kind of symptom and is this related and what can we do about it, you can call those people and they can probably help you out. They're sort of like our form of health extension relative to what Jerry works with from the extension side in nutrition and animal type programs. So this would be more related to the health side of people. So keep that in mind. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the people that have been in this study. We had about 40% of these folks were producers, pork producers, and 40% of these, and the rest of them, 60%, were non-pork producers. And we wanted to just look at these two in terms of what some of their exposures were and what some of their risks were. And what we found was that you can see what on the yellow bar there, those are the pork producers. And they had about a 23 or so % of them had one or more of these respiratory conditions that I talked about, as compared to about 14% or so. So that's what we call a risk ratio, about 50% higher than the other people. And that's something that is not unusual necessarily, because we've seen that for some time. The idea is we've got to prevent that. Here's some of the results from this certified safe farm. We have gotten people to wear their personal protective equipment. You can see the blue line there are the people in the intervention or the certified safe farms, and over the years of the study have gone up significantly compared to the controls in the yellow, orange, or whatever color that is. And has that been a benefit to them? Well, here's this condition I mentioned, is organic dust toxic syndrome. And you can see that the blue line, which are the intervention group, the people that are certified safe farm, are significantly less than what you see in the control farmers. So there is some advantage there in terms of the disease outcomes, illness outcomes. And in another condition, this bronchitis condition, if you look at the swine farms on your left, particularly the young people, have significantly lower levels of this bronchitis compared to the control farms. You can also see that in those farms that are not swine farms as well. But there is an advantage here, and it's one of the reasons being that they're wearing the respirators, but they're also doing other things to try to decrease their exposure to dust. Then one of the other things that's quite rewarding to us is that the people that were in the people that came in to do this clinical screening, their lung function was checked. There's a machine that tests your lungs, how well they work, how well you can get air in and out of your lungs. And the people, when they first came in, about 20% of them had lower than normal pulmonary lung function. But after 4 years in the program, about 70% of them had improved. And that's something that we think is pretty exciting information to say that, yeah, this program might be doing some good. And does it save any money? Well, this slide compares the red, the controls who are not in the certified safe farm, versus the blue in terms of what they paid for their health, any medical costs that were related to their occupational exposure. And one of them on it is divided into whether the insurance paid it or whether they paid it out of their pocket. But you can see on the left, the insurance people in the certified safe farms were a lot lower. The insurance company paid about half of what those in the control paid. Significant savings, almost 50%, as you can see on the bottom. Savings in health and safety medical care costs for those that were in the certified safe farm program. And out of pocket was about the same. There wasn't a whole lot of difference. But the overall savings was about 27% combined. So, again, if you can show that kind of result, that ought to be coming back into your pocket because you've done the work to prevent the costs to the insurance company and to yourself. And then I want to show you one more slide and before we change a little bit, and that is there a relationship to the score of the farm? This graph shows you that as the score went higher, the costs, the medical care costs, went down. So those that had a relatively low safety score were up close to $500 per year for these actual total safety costs, medical costs. And those that were in the high safety score, 96 to 100, it was down to almost 200. So it's nice to see that kind of relationship, that if you do the work to get the higher score by removing the hazards, it's going to save you money. Now, making a transition to our demonstration. This is a project that we have some funding from the National Pork Board. And we have Liz Wagstrom back here who's working with us on that as an advisor. And again, what we want to do is to take this information, not just this information, but a lot of information of researches we have been doing, and we want to combine that with the materials that the National Pork Board has generated for worker health and safety, and then use that with a system to deliver it out across the country to as many producers and workers as we can encourage to be a part of the program. So we've started in terms of our having our committee put together. We've got quite a large representation from different aspects of the industry, as well as researchers and so on. And hopefully we'll be starting that this spring yet. And it will be, this is the first seminar we've given on it to sort of get the information out that this is going to be happening. Hopefully we will also be able to speak at the National Pork Expo in June of this year as well to start that out. And the first round, we look at this as happening in 2 rounds, and following this, we'll hope to be able to start this webcasting information mainly to managers, and then hopefully work into workers on facilities later after that. And here are the people that are making up this working group, as you can see here now. There's large producers as well as smaller producers, pork board, and OSHA consultation is involved as well.